Is Louisville a contender in the ACC in 2025? Well, let's see what the projection says about this team. And first, before we get to that, though, we are going to look at the schedule. So here is the schedule for Louisville. As you see, they will open up with Eastern Kentucky on August 30th. And then they'll play a Friday night game against James Madison. They actually play 2 Friday night games. They'll also play Miami on a Friday night. But they'll play James Madison September 5th, Friday night. Then they get a bye week, which is kind of, that is not where you want the bye week. In between two, group of 5 teams. They play Bowling Green the next week, September 20th. So not an ideal spot for that first bye week. And then they'll go on the road to play Pittsburgh. They open up ACC play on September 27th. And then Virginia at home on October 4th. And then they get their other bye week. So you talk about, not ideal bye weeks. Both of these for Louisville. I guess the one before Miami, that's a pretty good spot because it's before a Friday night game, because that would be a short week. So that one, it's in a good spot. But that first one, you'd rather move it, I don't know, maybe before Clemson or something. Because, again, they're going to have both of their bye weeks, and then they'll play 7 straight games to close out the season, which normally you only have 1 bye week. 7 straight games, not a big deal. But when teams have 2 bye weeks, playing 7 straight games is a good bit. So, yeah, Miami on a Friday night after that bye week, October 17th. That'll be on the road as well. So that bye week, again, is in a good spot. Then you've got Boston College on October 25th at home. On the road to play Virginia Tech on November 1st. Then they'll play Cal on November 8th at home. Clemson on November 15th at home. And then it's a road game at SMU on November 22nd. And they'll close things out with Kentucky at home on November 29th. So, again, when you look at the schedule, non-conference, you got Eastern Kentucky, James Madison, Bowling Green, and Kentucky. Not a very tough non-conference. And, in fact, they'll play all their non-conference games at home. You look at their tough road games in the ACC. You got Pitt, Miami, Virginia Tech, SMU. Those could all be actually pretty tough games. So that's a pretty tough road schedule. The home schedule is better. You got Virginia, Boston College, Cal, and Clemson. That Clemson game could turn out to be a really big one. But yeah, that's where we're at with the schedule here. It is again an easier non-conference schedule, but the conference schedule is actually pretty tough. And in fact, let's see how it stacks up with the rest of the teams in the ACC. You can see their opponents this year had a 37-27 record last year in the ACC, a 58% win percentage. That is one of the toughest schedules in the conference. It's tied for the second toughest schedule in the ACC with Boston College. So they do have a tough conference schedule, playing, a lot of the better teams, playing Miami, playing Clemson, playing SMU. It's going to be a grind for Louisville in the ACC this season. All right, so let's look at the projections now. Before we get to this year's projection, let's look back at our projections from the last 4 years. And you can see these projections for Louisville actually have been very accurate besides 2023. In 2021, projected to go 6-6. They did go 6-6. And in 2022, projected to go 6-6. They went 7-5. Now, they beat the projections by a lot in 23. Again, they were projected to go 6-6. They went 10-2. So they beat the projection by 4 games. And then in 2024, last season, projected to go 8-4, they did go 8-4. So, like I said, 3 out of the last 4 years, projection has been very accurate. 2 of those 3 years actually right on the money. We'll see if the projection is accurate this year. And do keep in mind, this is not a prediction. There is no human element here. This is all based off of our projected record formula, just like we do every year. The only human element here would be where I put the teams in terms of tiers. So I rank all the teams, put them all into tiers. We did that video a while back if you want to go check it out. But Louisville is a tier 3 team. So that's where they are. You see the scale over here on the right. If they play a tier 4 team, that game will be in the purple, 61-70% if it's at home. But if it's on the road, then that game becomes a 50-50 game. And so that's the way this works. And we will start with the easier wins for Louisville. And I think you've got 3 of them, 3 non-conference games. Eastern Kentucky, James Madison, and Bowling Green. Louisville should be able to roll in all 3 of these games. I wouldn't say guaranteed wins, especially James Madison. I think James Madison's close to 80%, whereas Eastern Kentucky and Bowling Green, Eastern Kentucky's probably close to 99%. Bowling Green's probably like 90-95. But anyways, they're all in the green. They're all going to be counted as wins when we do the formula at the end. So 3 easier games for Louisville. Should start off 3-0 going into ACC conference play. And from there, you see Boston College, California, Kentucky in the blue. These are all games that Louisville should be, pretty big favorites in all 3 of these games. There are a couple of tiers ahead of these teams. These are all tier 5 teams. I would say Vegas will have Louisville favored by double digits in these 3 games. Maybe not Kentucky just because it's a rivalry game. And who knows, maybe Kentucky bounces back this year. But based off of where they finished last year, and remember, with our tier rankings, it goes off of the end of last season. We can only move teams up or down by 1 tier. So keep that in mind when you look at these different tiers. But maybe some of these teams are a lot better or a lot worse, and then that's where the projection is going to be a little bit off, and that's where you have to kind of do a prediction. Projection is a very, very conservative approach. So 3 wins there where you feel pretty good, not guaranteed wins, but you feel pretty good about those games for Louisville. All right, next we've got 1 game in the purple. That's Virginia. So this is one where I feel like Louisville will be favored by about a touchdown or so, 6, 7, 8 points. Virginia, I think will be a decent team this year. They're just 1 tier behind Louisville. We'll see how that plays out. And then really only 1 game where they're going to be, I think, a clear underdog. That's Miami on the road again on a Friday night. Miami is a tier above Louisville, plus the game is on the road. That's why it is in the yellow. But when you look at this schedule, as tough as it is in the ACC, do you see any games on this schedule where you'd say Louisville can't win, or any games where you think they're going to be a big underdog? I mean, really, no. Yeah, they might be an underdog against Miami, might be an underdog against Clemson, maybe even Virginia Tech on the road, or even SMU on the road. Maybe by a little bit, but not a lot. These are all winnable games. So I think Louisville does have a very high ceiling in 2025. So you look at the rest of these games, and these are all considered 50-50 games. We're talking about Pittsburgh, Virginia Tech, Clemson, and SMU. So Pittsburgh and Virginia Tech, those are tier 4 teams. Louisville is in a tier above them, but those games are on the road. SMU is in the same tier as Louisville, and then Clemson's a tier above Louisville, but that game is at Clemson. That's why that one is a 50-50 game. So, yeah, you look at these 4 games, it's going to come down to these 4 games right here. This is going to determine the season for Louisville. Let's say they lose to Miami. If they win the rest of these games, they beat Pitt, Virginia Tech, Clemson, and SMU, they should be right there in the college football playoff, and probably in the ACC championship. So it's going to be tough, but if they can find a way to win all these games, or maybe they slip up and lose, but they beat Miami, there are a couple different ways they could get there, but it could also go the other way. They could lose to Virginia and Miami, and then maybe they lose 3 of these 4 50-50 games, or they get upset against Kentucky or something. It could obviously go either way. So to get the projection, basically you average those scenarios out, and when you average everything out, you get 8-4 for Louisville. So same record as last year. If I was putting an over/under on this team, I might go with like 8.5, because if they do split those 50-50 games, you've got 2 losses there, and then they'll say they lose to Miami. That's only 3 losses, but the odds would say they might lose to Virginia or Boston College or Cal or Kentucky. Those are not guaranteed wins. And if they do slip up and lose one of those games, then that's how they could drop to 8-4. We'll see how it plays out. But yeah, 8-4, I think, if anything, it's on the low end. And I will say that the projected win total was like 8.2 something or 8.3. So it was closer to 9-3 than it was 8-4. That's why, again, I'd probably put the over-under at 8.5. So what do you guys think about Louisville? What's your projection for this team? Let me know down in the comments below.